You drop through the shaft at a rate of 10 meters per second. The cable hums. The cage vibrates in your palms. At 1 kilometer, the air starts to thicken. At 2 kilometers, your ears pop. At 3 kilometers, a new sound arrives. Not the steel, not the wind. It is the rock itself beginning to speak. They told you a mine is just a hole. They told you humans have dug deeper and deeper for centuries, and the only problem is darkness. They told you wrong. At 4,000 meters below ground, the physics of survival inverts completely. The thing that keeps you alive at the surface becomes the thing that kills you down here. And the engineering solution to that is more brutal than any skyscraper foundation you have ever seen. By the end of this descent, you will understand why a deep shaft is not a hole at all. It is a machine for resisting collapse, and the human body is the weakest component in it. The Mponeng gold mine in South Africa reaches just past 4 kilometers into the crust. That is 4 kilometers of solid rock above your head. 4 kilometers. Think about the weight of that. 1 cubic meter of granite weighs roughly 2.7 tons. Now multiply that by the volume of a mountain. That weight is pressing down on every square meter of the tunnel ceiling. At 4 kilometers, the overburden pressure exceeds 100 megapascals. That is the equivalent of a stack of 1,000 passenger cars balanced on a single square inch of rock. You are standing under that. But the rock does not crush you instantly because the tunnel is not empty. It is held open by engineered reinforcement, steel arches, shotcrete, rock bolts driven into the surrounding mass at specific angles. Every bolt is a tension element, pulling the fractured rock back together, forcing it to support itself. But here is the catch. The deeper you go, the more the rock wants to fracture. And when it fractures, it does not just crack, it bursts. Rock bursting is a phenomenon unique to deep mining. At high confining stress, the stored elastic energy in the rock releases violently. Slabs of quartzite detach from the tunnel wall at ballistic velocity. In South African mines, these bursts have killed men standing 50 meters away. The rock does not fall. It explodes. This is not a problem you solve with a harder helmet. And yet miners walk past burst zones every shift. They reinforce the face immediately after each blast, before the stress redistributes. They install yielding supports that bend instead of breaking. The engineering is not about stopping the rock. It is about giving the rock a controlled way to release its energy without killing anyone. Now, layer in the heat. The geothermal gradient in the Earth's crust averages roughly 25 degrees Celsius per kilometer. At 4 kilometers, ambient rock temperature reaches 100 degrees Celsius. But the air in the tunnel is not at 100 degrees, because if it were, you would die within minutes. The cooling system at Mponeng is the largest industrial refrigeration plant in the Southern Hemisphere. It pumps chilled water through miles of pipe to heat exchangers underground. The air is pulled across these exchangers and dropped to below 30 degrees before it reaches the working face. 30 degrees does not sound dangerous, but combine it with 95% humidity and heavy physical labor, and you are in a different physiological regime. The human body cools itself by evaporating sweat. When the air is already saturated, sweat does not evaporate. Your core temperature rises. You begin to overheat. At Mponeng, miners work in teams of 8 to 12. They drill, blast, and muck for 45 minutes. Then they rotate to a cooling station for 15 minutes. The shift is 7 hours, but the actual time at the face is under 4. The rest is recovery. That is not inefficiency. That is survival arithmetic. And the air itself becomes a problem at depth, not because of oxygen percentage, but because of density. At 4 kilometers, the air is roughly 40% denser than at the surface. Breathing becomes harder. The lungs work against increased resistance. Carbon dioxide builds up faster in dead zones of the tunnel. Ventilation must be continuous and directional, pulling fresh air down one shaft and exhaust up another. If the fans stop, the heat and gas concentrations become lethal within minutes. The Chilean miners who were trapped at the San José Mine in 2010 experienced a different version of this reality. They were not at 4 kilometers. They were at roughly 700 meters, but they were sealed in by a collapse that blocked all ventilation. The refuge area measured roughly 50 square meters. 33 men. No airflow. Temperature rising to 34 degrees Celsius. Humidity near 100%. That is not inefficiency. That is survival arithmetic. And when survival arithmetic breaks down, when the fans stop, when the shaft collapses, the margin between life and death shrinks to inches of borehole. The Chilean miners at 700 meters knew that margin better than any engineer above ground ever will. If you want to keep descending into these stories, the ones where physics becomes a matter of life and death, subscribe. Then drop the number 17 in the comments, the days they held on before anyone even knew they were alive. They survived the first 17 days on 2 spoonfuls of tuna per man per day, groundwater from a tank, and water drained from machinery radiators. They rationed with military precision. They assigned specific men to measure oxygen levels every hour using a handheld meter they found in a maintenance locker. When the first borehole reached them, it was a narrow tube called a paloma, a dove. They sent up notes. One of them read, "We are well in the shelter, the 33 of us. The drill hit us at a depth of 700 meters. The temperature down here is 34 degrees and the air is thick. That thickness is the hidden variable in every deep mine. It changes how sound travels. It changes how the body perceives time. It changes how the engineers calculate the lifespan of every mechanical system. A bearing that lasts 10,000 hours at the surface fails in 3,000 at 4 kilometers because the viscous lubricant overheats." You begin to realize that depth is not a dimension. It is an environment with its own set of physical laws, and those laws favor the rock. The workers at Maponeng do not descend in a single vertical drop. They take a series of declines, ramps that spiral downward at a gradient of 10 degrees. The ride takes 90 minutes each way. That is 3 hours of every shift spent traveling. 3 hours of nothing but the drone of the diesel engine and the temperature climbing as the shaft drops. At the bottom, the average miner carries 60 kilograms of drill steel, explosives, and personal gear. The heat hits immediately. Your shirt is wet within 2 minutes. Your hands sweat inside the gloves. The drill vibration travels up your arms and into your spine. The noise is 110 decibels, continuous, for the entire shift. Hearing protection is mandatory, but most miners still lose high-frequency hearing within 5 years. That is considered acceptable. Acceptable in the context of an industry where the injury rate per million hours worked is still roughly 5 times that of general construction. The safety record has improved drastically over the past 50 years, but the fundamental physics have not changed. At depth, every system is under stress: the rock, the machinery, the human body. The only thing that keeps a deep mine operational is the constant application of energy in the form of cooling, ventilation, and reinforcement. If the power goes out for more than a few hours, the mine becomes uninhabitable, and there is no backup for that. No generator can run the refrigeration plant indefinitely. The cables that feed power down the shaft are the lifeline. If they sever, the temperature at the bottom rises by roughly 1 degree every 5 minutes. Within an hour, it is unsurvivable. That is the margin. A deep mine is not a workplace. It is a temporary arrangement between the human and the rock. The rock allows you to stay as long as you keep it cool, keep it supported, keep it ventilated. The moment you stop, the rock reclaims the space. And yet there is a psychological dimension that engineers often overlook. The Lancet published a study on the Chilean miners that documented acute stress reactions, sleep disruption, and anxiety disorders during confinement. But the same study noted that the miners who maintained structured routines and social roles fared better. They organized into 3 groups of 11. They cleaned, cleared debris, measured oxygen, and reinforced walls. They created a simulation of normal work to keep their minds from unraveling. The human brain is not designed for deep underground. It evolved on an open savanna where the horizon was visible. In a deep tunnel, there is no horizon. The visual field collapses to the illuminated patch in front of you. The rest is black. The black is not the color black. It is the absence of any photon. Your eyes never adapt because there is nothing to adapt to. Miners call that the dead zone. When your lamp fails, you are not in the dark. You are in a space where up and down lose meaning. The only orientation is the touch of the tunnel wall. If the wall is warm, you are near a vent. If it is cold, you are near a water pipe. The body learns to read the rock by temperature and texture. That is a skill that takes years to develop. A new miner cannot tell the difference between a stable face and one that is about to burst. The experienced miner notices a change in the sound of the drill, a slight change in the color of the muck, a shift in the way the air moves around his face. These are not taught in training. They are acquired through fear. Every veteran miner at Mponeng has a story about a close call. A rock that fell the moment after he stepped away. A temperature spike that forced an evacuation. A fire in a ventilation shaft that killed 3 men in a different section 20 kilometers away. They talk about these events in a flat tone, without drama. The drama would consume too much energy. The true cost of deep mining is not measured in dollars per ounce of gold. It is measured in the number of heartbeats a miner expends per shift. At rest, your heart pumps 5 liters of blood per minute. At work in a deep, hot mine, it pumps 20. Over a 40-hour week, that is an excess of roughly 40,000 additional heartbeats. Over a 20-year career, that excess approaches 50 million beats. The body pays that debt. Autopsies of deep mine workers show enlarged right ventricles, thickened heart walls, and chronic kidney damage from dehydration. The heat stress accelerates every degenerative process. A 40-year-old miner at Mponeng has the cardiovascular age of a 60-year-old surface worker. 50 million extra heartbeats. That is not a number. That is a debt written on a man's chest. If the cost of depth matters to you, subscribe, because we are only halfway down, and the rock does not bargain. Drop 50 million in the comments if you can feel the weight of that debt. They know this. They stay because the pay is 3 times the surface average. They stay because the work is the only work available in the region. They stay because the camaraderie underground is unlike anything on the surface. When you depend on the man next to you to notice the change in the drill sound, you form a bond that does not translate to the world of concrete and glass. But the rock does not care about bonds. At 4 kilometers, the seismic activity from mining triggers thousands of microtremors every day. Most are imperceptible at the surface. Underground, they feel like a continuous low-frequency shudder. The tunnel floor vibrates under your boots. The steel arches groan. The sound is not loud. It is deep. It travels through your chest. Engineers monitor these tremors with geophones installed in the rock. When a pattern indicates an imminent burst, they evacuate the section. But the prediction window is measured in seconds, not hours. The geophone data is processed by algorithms that have been trained on decades of collapse records. The algorithm is better than a human at recognizing the precursor pattern, but it is not perfect. In 2022, the ITA Collapse Report documented case study 14, a tunnel in the Alps that failed because of a 2-millimeter gap in a gasket at atmospheric pressure. At depth, the same gap would have been catastrophic. The difference between surface engineering and deep engineering is the difference between controlling a single variable and controlling a cascade of variables that reinforce each other. The deep mine is the purest expression of that cascade. Every problem you solve creates 2 new problems. You cool the air, but the chilled water pipes condensate and drip onto the electrical equipment. You reinforce the rock, but the bolts corrode in the humid air. You ventilate the tunnel, but the exhaust heats the surrounding rock, which then radiates heat back into the tunnel. There is no final solution, only continuous adaptation. The miners who survive the longest are not the strongest. They are the ones who learn to pace themselves, to hydrate before they feel thirsty, to eat salt tablets before cramps set in, to sleep immediately after the shift, even if the bunkhouse is noisy and the lights stay on. They learn to treat their bodies as a resource that must be managed, not a source of power. The drill does the power work. The body does the endurance work. The cooling system at Mponeng uses 300,000 kilograms of ammonia as refrigerant. The plant consumes roughly 30 megawatts of electricity. That is enough to power a small town. But without it, the mine closes. The refrigeration is not a luxury. It is the condition of possibility for every kilogram of ore extracted below 3 kilometers. And still, the rock takes lives. Every year, South African deep mines report roughly 200 fatalities. The rate has dropped by 80% since the 1990s, but 200 is still 200. Each one is a story that the other miners carry, a name on a memorial plaque at the shaft head, a hole in a crew rotation that takes months to fill because the new man doesn't know how to read the rock. When a miner dies underground, the body is brought up with the same cage that carries the living. The cage does not stop. The other workers stand in silence. The body is covered with a canvas sheet. It is a ritual that has not changed in a century, and the next shift goes down. Not because they are indifferent, because the gold is still there, because the rock is still there, and because the contract between the human and the rock does not include an exit clause. You go down, you work, you come up, until you do not. The men who work at Mponeng average 22 underground deaths per year across the operation. That is a statistic. The statistic means nothing to the widow. It means nothing to the crew that returns to the face the next morning. What matters to them is the routine. The ritual of checking each other's equipment before the cage drops. The shared silence during the 90-minute descent. The moment when the temperature crosses the threshold and the ventilation door closes behind them, sealing them into a space that is no longer part of the surface world. They do not think about the weight above them. If they thought about it, they could not work. The human mind is not equipped to process the pressure of 4 kilometers of rock. It is a number too large to feel, so the miners ignore it. They focus on the drill, the muck, the next support bolt. But the rock does not ignore them. When the temperature spikes and the fans struggle, the rock reminds them. When the floor trembles and the geophone alarms sound, the rock reminds them. When a slab bursts off the face and kills the man 10 meters away, the rock reminds them. The question is not whether you can survive 4,000 meters below ground. The question is whether you can tolerate the constant reminder that you are a guest in a place that has never welcomed guests. The answer is that some can. Some learn to read the rock, pace their bodies, and accept the risk. Others break. The psychological screening at Maponang is rigorous. Candidates with claustrophobia or anxiety disorders are filtered out before they ever step into the cage. But the screening cannot predict how a man will react to his first rock burst, to the sound of 1,000 tons of stone detonating 30 meters away. Some freeze, some run, some stand still and continue working because they understand that freezing and running do not change the physics. The men who survive are the ones who accept the physics of the situation and adapt to it on an emotional level, not just an intellectual one. The hidden physics of extreme depth is not a formula. It is a state of being, a state in which the body operates at the edge of its tolerance, the mind operates in a narrowed, focused channel, and the environment operates according to rules that do not appear in any textbook. The textbook says that heat is transferred by conduction. The miner knows that heat is transferred by the rock breathing on you. The textbook says that rock stress is a tensor. The miner knows that rock stress is a sound that changes when the face is about to fail. The textbook says that ventilation is about flow rate and pressure drop. The miner knows that ventilation is the difference between making it to the end of shift and collapsing on the drill. The textbook cannot teach you what the rock sounds like when it is about to kill you. The rock teaches you that, and the rock is a patient teacher. The deepest mines on Earth today push past 4 kilometers. The next frontier is 5. At 5 kilometers, the rock temperature exceeds 125 degrees Celsius. The cooling plant becomes too large to fit on the surface. The ventilation shaft becomes a thermal chimney that needs active suppression. The rock pressure exceeds the yield strength of most conventional supports. Some engineers believe that 5 kilometers is the practical limit for human mining. Beyond that, the environmental control costs exceed the value of the ore. The machines will go deeper, operating remotely, but the humans will not. Because at 5 kilometers, the rock does not just speak, it roars. His crew knew it too. That is why, when the shift ended and the new team went down, they found Romanenko still sitting in the same spot where he always sat. Not panicking, not frozen, just sitting, listening, reading the rock with his hands on the wall. He had learned to translate its language, and he was waiting for the next syllable. They brought him up, and he never went down again. He transferred to the surface maintenance crew. He lasted 3 months before he quit. The silence above ground was unbearable. The horizon felt like a lie. He had spent so many hours reading the rock that the open sky felt empty. That is the deeper truth of underground engineering. The tunnel does not just change your physiology, it rewrites your perception of space. You learn to measure distance by sound, time by temperature, and safety by the minute shifts in the air on your skin. When you come back up, the world feels flat. The horizon feels wrong. And no textbook prepares you for that. You just watched a man trade the roar of the rock for the silence of the sky and lose himself in the process. Subscribe if you want to stay underground with us, because the next descent will take you even deeper into the things no textbook measures. Drop a word in the comments, just one, that captures what that silence did to Romanenko. Because the real engineering is not in the steel or the concrete or the cooling plant. The real engineering is the transformation of the human body into a sensor that can operate at 4 kilometers below the surface for 8 hours a day, for 20 years, without breaking. That is the most complex system in the shaft. The rock will always be there. It does not age. It does not fatigue. It does not care. The only variable is the human. And the human, when pushed to the limit, either adapts or is removed. The minds that survive are the ones whose workers adapt. So when you drive through a tunnel next year, remember the 2-millimeter gasket. Remember the 100 megapascal pressure. Remember the men who learned to read the rock. And remember that the only reason you are not standing under 4 kilometers of granite right now is a system of compromises between human will and physics. The rock does not give permission. It merely tolerates. The rock does not give permission. It merely tolerates. And tolerance, in the language of the deep earth, is not a guarantee. It is a temporary ceasefire, renewed by every cooling tower, every rock bolt, every miner who steps into the cage, knowing the contract could be voided before the next shift. The cost of that contract is written in the thickened heart walls of the men who descend. It is etched into the geophone traces of every seismic event that didn't break the surface. The mine expands, the tunnels lengthen, the machinery adapts. But the fundamental equation does not change. Depth demands energy. Energy demands infrastructure. Infrastructure demands human presence. And human presence demands a body capable of reading the rock, enduring the heat, and accepting that the horizon will never return. The next time you stand in a subway tunnel 10 meters below street level, remember that you are already in the dead zone. The difference between your tunnel and a 4,000-meter shaft is not a matter of kind. It is a matter of pressure. Every meter of rock above you is a negotiation you did not witness. The engineers who designed that subway tunnel solved for water ingress, soil load, and ventilation. They did not solve for rock bursting at 100 megapascals. They did not solve for a core temperature of 100 degrees. They built for the shallow earth, where the rules are still the ones you learned in physics class. Deep mining is where those rules break. And that is the distinction that matters. Between a hole in the ground and a shaft that pierces the crust. Between a construction project and a survival operation. Between the world of the surface, where you can always walk out, and the world of the deep, where the only exit is a 90-minute ride up through the rock that wants to hold you. The men who ride that cage every day do not think about these words. They think about the state of the drill steel, the taste of the water, the sound of the fan. They think about the crewmate who is breathing too fast. They think about the bolt that needs tightening before the next blast. They do not think about the 4 kilometers. They cannot afford to. But you can. You can hold that number in your mind. 4,000 meters. The weight of 12 Eiffel Towers on every square meter. The temperature of boiling water in the rock around you. The air thick enough to feel like a physical substance. And the men who walk into that space, not because they are reckless, but because the rock does not care about their fear. And they have learned not to care about it either. That is the final truth. Not about engineering, about the people who do it. The tunnel does not remember them. The rock does not mark their names. The gold they extract is melted, refined, and eventually stored in vaults or circuits or dental crowns. Their labor becomes invisible. The heat they endured dissipates. The vibration they absorbed fades from their bones only when they stop moving. But the skill of reading the rock passes from hand to hand, shift to shift, decade to decade. It is a knowledge that lives in the body, not the textbook. It is the only thing the deep earth cannot take. The miners call it the touch, and when the last miner comes up from the last deep shaft, generations from now, the touch will go silent. The rock will close, the tunnels will flood, the temperature will rise back to equilibrium, and the earth will heal itself as if the incision had never been made. But for now, the cage still runs. The diesel engine still echoes in the decline. The ammonia still hisses through the cooling plant. And somewhere at 4 kilometers below, a man with calloused hands and sweat-soaked clothes places his palm against the granite and reads the rock's next word. He is not afraid. He is listening.